the willingness to share yourself completely.
Allowing yourself to just relax into a moment.
If you want to truly know yourself and be honest with others.
Putting yourself in a situation that you otherwise wouldn't, just opening yourself up.
When you got flipped over and exposed your smooth underbelly.
Being willing to be hurt by someone else at the price of being genuine.
Being open and okay with being hurt.
Welcome to Emotion and Sound, brought to you by the Elephant Collective. I'm Adam Baird, and today, you're listening to the sound of vulnerability. We'd like to explore vulnerability in a couple of different ways today, and while creating music is certainly a vulnerable thing, shaping music is an entirely different game. Today we're talking to Max Nordby, our resident engineer, who's usually the one doing all the editing.
Usually behind the desk.
But now you're behind the mic.
Behind the mic.
Which is exciting. So thank you for being at this point 10 feet from where you usually are.
Oh, I know, right? It's not far.
It's a good change. So thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
We're hoping to talk to you about the dynamic of vulnerability in the studio. Mm-hmm. As an engineer, how do you feel that affects your role?
Right. So there's a couple huge aspects to vulnerability, right? One is the space. How do you set up a space for someone to be vulnerable? And that really comes with the atmosphere, the lighting. Are we giving them personally enough space?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, making them comfortable.
It's all built around atmosphere, I want to just keep saying. Because it's just, we have a really cool vibe in here, and we want people to be able to get to that point where they can be vulnerable.
Yeah. Well, you want to be able to engage with them, but also give them the space to do their own thing.
Right.
That's got to be difficult because you're helping them capture and record this important thing that means so much to them.
Right.
So what's that boundary like between facilitating comfort and also making sure the stuff gets made?
Boundaries are real hard in the studio because it differs by every single person. Some people want to walk their way through the studio, and some people want their own space. You have to gauge it real quick. Otherwise, the session's going to go south.
Well, if somebody doesn't feel comfortable, they're going to shut down. It's going to be much harder for them to go to that space.
Exactly. And sometimes it's the right headphone mix. It's just adding a little bit extra reverb onto their headphones so they can just feel like they're in a more open area. Even if they're not, what they're hearing is more open and more spacious.
And so that confidence that can come from, wow, I sound really great, you find that translates into helping artists open up?
100%. Yeah, if they feel like they sound good, they're going to perform.
Awesome. So reverb is a common tool you'd use for that, just to get sort of a more powerful vocal, a more responsive take?
Yeah, and now we're talking about vulnerability. It's such a good way to add a texture to enhance vulnerability, I want to say. Because it gives it that space and that depth that a dry vocal, and dry meaning there's no reverb or no delays on it. And you don't really hear it necessarily, but if I took it out of like any song you're ever listening to, you'd be like, this is completely different.
Yeah. Well, and it's cool because it makes the voice bigger.
It does.
Right? And that is more vulnerable because all of a sudden there's more of you in the headphones, and that should be scary. But it's actually really satisfying.
It really is, yeah. You're not just like front center right there in the person's face. You're spread out through the whole mix now. It lets you envelop somebody's whole headspace instead of just being right in front of them.
I mean, that feels intimate. I mean, it feels like we're really inside not just the singer's voice, but inside their head.
Right. It's a cool effect.
It is a cool effect. And we hope you, as the listener, are experiencing that right now. So while we're in here, in your head, we might as well just stress the importance of vulnerability. Whether or not you consider yourself a musician, opening up is the only way that we can receive help. So that doesn't mean you don't have to be an individual, but it just means that accepting the people around you only makes your life better. In order to talk about that and how we can better facilitate that in our musical and personal lives, we're talking to Jules Schroeder. Jules, talk to me about opening up.
Yeah. So having support, is so essential in this process because, a lot of us, we can feel like the lone wolf in our life where we have to explain ourselves to people and people around us don't get us. They don't get our vision. They're like, why are you spending your time doing that? Like my dad, when I was growing up, it was like, you really want to be a musician? Like, do you know that 1 in 100 million people make it? And and we believe we can believe our environment. We consume our environment. And, there's nothing wrong with that other than just being aware of what kind of support structures or accountability for structures for success are you giving yourself? And I find these conversations in isolation, behind your computer screen or in your basement or wherever you're listening to this, they're great. But if you don't have people around you that can amplify and can actually create a container that calls you forward, it becomes so much easier because otherwise you can get there on your own, but it can take a long time. And that's why I think, connecting with, the community at Elephant Collective and also, the people here, it's literally putting yourself in an accelerator. It's putting yourself in something that will naturally call you forward without you having to constantly carry this boulder uphill on your own. And that's something too, talk about 2020. We're moving out of the era of the individual and more into the essence of collaboration. And being the biggest fish in your own pond, it's not necessarily interesting anymore. That's been done, and if you really want to do that, great, you can totally do that. But I also think we're stepping into a space where, we have learned that our collective, superpowers are greater together than we are alone. And, it makes stuff just, move at lightning speed.
Yeah, lightning speed indeed. Well, thank you, Jules. Let's take a moment to dive into my head. What does that mean? This is Theory for 30 with Adam Baird. I want to talk to you today about Mixolydian because it's totally awesome. Basically, it's just a regular major scale with a lowered seventh or a flat seventh, but I like that it plays against the major three, so it still sounds happy while sounding interesting. You get kind of this... So I highly recommend using that. It just gives you a funky, wide palette to work with. You can use it in chord progressions. That's 1, flat 7, 4, 1. This has been Theory for 30 with Adam Baird. Boy, do I have to talk fast to get through that segment on time. For a more reasonably paced conversation, we have Dango Rose from Elephant Revival here to talk to us about a vulnerability perspective as it applies to the music industry. So, Dango, when it comes to the music industry in general, it's a little difficult, right? Because it's built on a lot of people who really, really, truly care. It's not stockbroking, it's not advertising. These people love what they're doing.
It's true.
But it's still a business, right? And what people would tell you in business is that vulnerability is a great way to get taken advantage of. But in music, it's basically the most important thing. So how do you reconcile that? I mean, how do you protect yourself while still maintaining that channel that allows you to do why you'd even be doing it in the first place?
Yeah, that is a good question. Surrounding yourself with the right people.
Yeah.
Surrounding yourself with the right team. So there's people, of course, that, can help, but also being able to wear different hats, So being able to separate the vulnerability of getting on stage, performing as a musician, sharing your soul, and then also, knowing how to settle up at the end of the night, right? And integrating those different sides, being willing to put yourself out there for promotion, knowing what kind of promotion actually works for you. How do you keep yourself authentic while trying to sell? It's really the framework for everything, because that's the part of it. It's how do you prepare yourself as a whole being so that you can more deliver the medicine, as my bandmate Bridget always calls it, to the people, which I guess is Nako's whole thing, medicine for the people. So how can you be a conduit or a channel or a vessel? So I think it's different when I'm performing songs and it's just me on stage with an instrument and singing. That is a different feeling for me than when I'm playing bass and just sort of being a conduit. That's how I kind of look at bass playing now, is honestly being a conduit. I sort of picture light coming down from above, coming through me and then into the earth, and then what's expressing out is the bass vibrations. So I'm looking at it almost on a level of like holding the space for the room to come together, which is what bass does, right?
Absolutely. It provides an open channel. It provides a foundation upon which everything else can happen.
Absolutely. And then in performing songs, I've almost recently just realized that just kind of have to relax into it in the same way, right? I just had to sort of stop caring, like if I'm rolling my eyes in the back of my head. Usually we'd be sleep deprived, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can't necessarily say that. There's been many times where I've of course not been feeling well for shows.
Sure.
But usually when the music starts, that goes away for a while.
Well, because it's a focus thing. All of a sudden, something is more important. Where you're not dwelling on how am I feeling at this particular moment. It's what am I doing here? What am I committing to? And how am I going to make that happen? Right.
Right. I just read something from Big Mama Fitzgerald, who works on all the gear here at the studio and is an old time performer.
Mm-hmm.
He was talking about, getting on stage and having a small crowd and the people talking and not paying attention and feeling like, why does nobody respect me or, playing my songs here and giving my soul. I'm not going to do this again.
Right.
The sound system sucks. There's TVs on, which is the worst.
It is.
The TV on thing.
Absolutely.
But then also recognizing that, well, this actually isn't about my experience. This actually isn't for me. I'm actually here so that other people can have a good experience.
Well, it has been an experience. Thanks, Dango. We appreciate you being here. Listener, it feels good to be vulnerable with you. So for a little vulnerability on my end, I'm just going to ask you to support the show. You know that there's all kinds of likey, sharey, subscribey buttons all over the place, and you know how to use them. So go ahead and hunt those down if you'd like to hear more things like this from us in the future. We're just getting started, and it's sure to be a fun ride. So if you'd like to help us with that, if you'd like to help us build this thing bigger and faster and stronger and better and harder and all those other cool Daft Punk words, you can donate directly to Emotion in Sound. Whatever you do, it all helps us keep this going, helps us bring more emotion and more sounds to your ears. So just go to emotioninsound.org to make a contribution. And that all brings us to today's special guest. We're talking to Jeremy Colbert, a songwriter out of Pennsylvania. Jeremy, we're really excited to have you here. Thank you for flying out to be with us in the studio. And we're going to be talking about your song, As Above, So Below. It's a beautiful piece, but where did it come from?
So the origin story of this song was I had just had a really powerful experience, and essentially around psychedelics.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a conversation with a very dear friend of mine who I went to college with, and we hadn't seen each other for a while, but she's kind of like my spiritual anchor. And we just had this real long phone conversation. And the main thing that we talked about was seeing our shadow in the brightest of light. Basically, to take our shadow sides of ourselves and to look at them, to shine the light on them and to face them. And it's this kind of paradoxical statement, because you can't really have a shadow if you're shining light on it. But then again, shadows are created by light.
It has to be shining somewhere in order for that shadow to exist. So it's not even about eliminating it, right? It's about learning to live with it and to put it into its best light or into its best shadow.
Absolutely. So it was a really just inspiring conversation, and it really helped me integrate my experience.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I got off the phone, I just sat down and opened up my notebook and just started writing and started with that line, which was see your shadow in the brightest of light. And it flowed out of me in maybe 20 minutes.
Wow.
And instantly I knew it was something just truly special. And it also revolved around one of my favorite phrases that I had come to sort of learn how to embody more through that powerful experience that I mentioned. And the phrase is, as above, so below.
Mm.
And it's honestly one of my favorite phrases. And I think that it sums up, a universal law that we can only grasp very slightly. I think that it's kind of like the fractal nature of the universe, the macro and the micro.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it goes kind of both ways in in all directions, for kind of infinitely.
Humans exist in that duality, right? For every reaction, equal and opposite reaction, light, shadow, birth, death. We somehow exist right in the middle of all of it. Yeah, that's something we overlook, and it's something we definitely can't understand. But it's really cool to know that it's there. So talk to me about how vulnerability has influenced your songwriting.
I tend to view vulnerability as a strength.
Mm-hmm.
I tell people, if they're opening up to me and they're like, I'm sorry that I'm opening up or dumping this on you. I'm like, listen, I love it when people make themselves vulnerable in front of me because it makes me feel like I can connect to them more.
Mm-hmm.
And music is such a way to do that. And writing original material and putting it out there, especially if you're singing it, you're literally like putting your diary out there in public, and you're singing it to people, depending on what you're writing about, of course. But it's a truly, truly vulnerable experience. And then to pursue it, to invest in it, to make sacrifices for it. And it's a whole process. It's a whole experience. But yeah, vulnerability is something I think about a lot.
Well, and it's like a muscle, right? If you don't use it, if you don't employ it often, it's easy to kind of get locked off from it and forget how to go there. If you're constantly visiting that vulnerable open space and remembering that when you're open, people aren't attacking you. They're not throwing tomatoes at you. Everything's totally... That's the thing we get scared of, right? It's this fear that, if I put this song out in front of people are going to hate me.
Mm-hmm.
No. Why would anyone do that? The worst thing that's going to happen is that people might just ignore you. But we play it out as such a horrible worst-case scenario. That, at least as a tool for myself, vulnerability has been really, really helpful in combating those kinds of thoughts and feelings, is recognizing, that's completely silly.
Yeah, it is to an extent, but there is some truth to like the fear of judgment. And I kind of view it this way as no matter what, if you are successful at anything, there are going to be people who are going to be jealous or who are not going to like what you're doing. If you look at any of your favorite musicians, how many times have you ran into a conversation where someone is just totally bashing like one of the people that you admire the most?
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of have to like, if you really want to do this music thing, and you even look at like the parodies, like the Saturday Night Lives, and like people get made fun of all the time when they put themselves out there. There is a legitimacy to that fear, but it kind of like comes with the territory. Like if you really want the exposure and the widespread success, and let's say you're a musician and your music becomes heard, around the country, around the world, chances are you're going to have a lot of criticism.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to be able to take that.
Absolutely.
But because it is inherently spreading and there is something about it, you have the opposite of that, which is people are connecting with it. They're reflecting upon it. They're loving it, and it just brings it back to the idea of duality.
Well, and that's the whole thing, right? It's not that there aren't negative consequences to being vulnerable. It's just that the positive merits, the way that it affects your life, your music, just your overall perspective, is so absolutely worth it. If it wasn't, people wouldn't make music. They wouldn't share it. But look at how much there is. Look at how many people are willing to go to that space and share. Because, sure, it sucks if 1 in 10 people says, yeah, I just really hate everything that you did up there. And, we can take that home and we can be sad about it. But there's 9 other people who really seem to enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
Those aren't often as loud, but it's always wonderful when you realize the positive effect that vulnerability can have on just one other person, 10,000 other people, whatever it is. That's a very cool feeling.
Yeah, and sometimes it's the best when it's just one. Because you're one-on-one, and it's just like this. It's just a moment, and it's shared between 2 people, and it's great.
It is great. Well, thank you for being vulnerable with us today. This is As Above, So Below by Jeremy Colbert.